always liked Pink Floyd, The Wall. It's one of my favorite albums. And so I wanted to create and talk about what my wall is in terms of interacting constructively with the world as a sensitive American man. And the first part of the wall I want to talk about is trauma. And so this part of the wall, or this brick in the wall, is comprised of the following things. So a lot of fear and terror without repair and overwhelm happened in the ages of kind of 0 to 5, at which point I became conscious, and a lot of shame hit me as a result of becoming aware of my behavior towards my younger siblings. I'm the oldest of 5. And what happened is the helplessness and the terror of the trauma, and particularly the way that my father kind of methodically enjoyed torturing me psychologically and physically, kind of expressed itself as me doing similar stuff to my younger siblings and not really knowing the true me before that happened. Now, luckily, I got to see the true siblings. Like I saw my siblings gradually warped into kind of versions that brought out the worst in them. And so I got to see what, beautiful siblings they were before I and my parents kind of twisted that. And so it kind of gives me a sense of that happened for me. But I guess the helplessness in particular translated into a sense of power at making my siblings feel helpless, which was a source of shame. So, because at the same time, my father was reading me the Old Testament, and that was all about, so then there's this moral overlay, says I'm bad. So bad and moral overlay. And this led to a new wall of a feeling of and a fear of loneliness. So it goes trauma, terror without repair, to waking up, around 4 and 5 years old and having some of my first conscious moments being someone who I observed, with the moral overlay of being a bad person, which further terrified me. So it's kind of, here, and then back to here, and then back to here, which further terrified me and made me kind of convinced that, I'd go to hell or, be, just an unwanted person, which created a new bit, which was being hyperactive, because there was no way for this to resolve. I mean, this was a terrifying thing, that I'm waking up in the world and I'm discovering I'm a bad person who is kind of doomed. And so this creates this frenetic hyper energy which then contributed to a learning disability. And being considered, so we have loneliness is going back to here, and this going over to here, and this going over to here, which further created new trauma of being ostracized, new shame of being a slow learner, a sense that, this is what happens for being bad, new loneliness, and then another, so disabilities. And then another bit of the wall being different. Singled out, for tutoring and things like that. And depression. Had a major wave of depression around age 13, so depression. Which then led to new loneliness because nobody wanted to acknowledge the depression or talk about it in any way, which led to a new sense of shame. I've got these shameful feelings, which leads to loneliness again. And we got new kind of walls of kind of shutting down. Because the feeling of helplessness continued into my teens. It became an intellectual helplessness where my father would set these word and mind traps, which no matter how anyone engaged with him would end up with them basically feeling stupid and humiliated, which just tied into this whole mess here. But then there's and that kind of sense of humiliation and helplessness kind of re-triggers the early physical traumas, which have not been repaired, so they're coming undone. Or they're, I guess, getting reactivated, so it's back. So it's this mental humiliation. Helplessness. And so they kind of go back and forth, where every time I feel mentally caught in one of my father's traps, I then re-experience some of the terror and rage. So rage becomes another, like the wall, the rage at the helplessness. And the feeling of violence and suicide and helplessness, which then goes over to loneliness, because no one wants to talk about that. No one wants to acknowledge that there's pain that's that big. No one wants to ask about the feelings. No one wants to listen when I talk about it. Everyone wants to deny. So that's another kind of layer in the wall, is denial. Because if I talk at all about what enrages me about my parents, I get more rage in the form of denial, which is, you have wonderful parents, don't talk about them like that, you're so lucky. So, this creates a certain amount of depression then, back over to here. And now we add cynicism, because we realize that no one around me is honest, despite preaching all this moral overlay. There's no honesty. And so there's this complex web where stuff goes this way, and then this way, and then this way, and then this way, and then this way. And it just goes round and round and round and round in this co-infection of ever-growing disease. And eventually this endless circle starts to get too tangled to deal with. And there's this sense of deep dread and so there's dread, there's loneliness of loneliness of loneliness, because there's the first loneliness about being all alone and unlovable. Then there's the second loneliness about not having someone able to understand. Then there's the loneliness of having terror and feelings about that, and nobody wanting to understand or listen to that. Then there's the rage at the hypocrisy. Everyone saying, 5 or 10 times a day, "How are you?" But with the absolute clear statement that absolutely none of those people want to know any of this web of insanity, loneliness, grief, shame, trauma, bitterness, desperation, because it all goes back to this feeling, this wall here of trauma, which are feelings of desperation, panic, and fear, as a 2-year-old infant with relatively 25-foot to 30-foot adults who are supposed to be protecting and represent God in the world, who are in fact terrorizing and erratic and having storms of all kinds of painful energy. It's terrifying. And yet, no one wants to acknowledge that it's terrifying. And then there's this pall of kind of secrecy around the shame of what's happening to me, the shame of what I'm doing to my siblings. Nobody wants to acknowledge that either. My parents stand by it and just pretend it's not happening. And this is absolutely terrifying, because how can you begin to address a problem with so many layers when every single adult and person around is in denial, when nothing's being talked about? And so there's this just deep frustration and desperation around all of these layers, And it all goes back to this sense of deep insecurity around survival, emotionally, socially, and physically, which can get triggered and re-triggered in ways that I still don't fully understand. I think the closest thing that explores it is complex PTSD, where you're so terrified for so long that you kind of get confused. There's no off switch. And so there's just this underlying panic. And I think that this got somewhat sealed in with beliefs around being punished by an angry God who supposedly mirrored the rage and anger of my father, who terrorized and beat me with a belt and then didn't repair so that I felt safe. I did not feel safe. Having this denied by everyone left me feeling depressed and completely unsafe. As obvious, I was going to be lied to. And this is, I think, perfectly logical and obvious, particularly when we understand that to a child, there is a world of giants, and erratic and insane giants at that are literally 5 times more big and powerful and are in some big collusion to deny all the horror, all the pain that's going on. And for me, this settled into an underlying panic, a deep pain, a horrifying loneliness, rage, fear of the rage being found out, a sense of being hurt and betrayed, confused, bemused, and angry that so confused, bemused, and angry that no one was willing to see it in me or any of the children around me, in my siblings. It's just this wall of secrecy. And to me, this is so threatening and out of control that really nothing can be done until this threat is resolved. It's like a deep rebellion and refusal to participate, and yet it doesn't get resolved. And so there's this huge kind of like, wait, everyone stop until this is sorted out, but it's not sorted out. Life goes on, but it doesn't feel safe or fun because there's this looming, frozen, kind of deadly issue, which, because it's trauma, which is frozen in time, trauma, when it happens in certain ways, shuts down the time part of memory so that it stays in the present. So there's this constant thing like, someone please do something about this overwhelming issue. And no one does. and no one wants to talk about it, and no one wants to acknowledge the desperation, the urgency of it. So then new bricks go in. So one I'll call chauvinism. The diminishment of emotion. For American boys in particular, raw chauvinism. You're like a girl. You're crying like a girl. Girls are less than. You're weak if you have emotion. So chauvinism. Which in turn leads to shame and loneliness, because I'm going to have 5 times more emotion than average with all this trauma that feels life and death going on. It feels terrifying. So on the one hand, I'm given the message that I'm worthless, that there's something wrong with me, that there's something different, which I already know from all the other shame. And then I'm left with 5 times more emotion than average. I go into my head to sort this all out. And because I need to escape all these emotions, I develop this 5 times manic brain where I've just got so much going on in my imagination, so much going on in my mind all the time, in pictures, in all kinds of ideas, and it becomes an escape. But it also differentiates me from, I can literally have 8-hour conversations and just be getting started and never be able to keep up with my mind, which is, I can have, in 3 seconds, 2 hours worth of, it can take me 2 hours to articulate most of what I see in 3 seconds. I just can't keep up with a brain that fast. That's super manic to develop and go beyond all of this insanity and to try and solve the problem, which I'm trying to do manically because it feels desperately urgent in that state of shame and trauma, which further differentiates me as well as frees me because no one else is thinking that much or that deeply or about those topics. So I don't fit in to being a man. So I grow up listening to girls and women complain that men don't talk, men aren't emotional, men don't care, men aren't interested in relationship, men don't want to communicate about feelings, and I want nothing but to do all that, and I feel invisible. Because I'm right there listening to this, and neither man nor woman has ever wanted to listen to this, and I get the exact opposite feedback when I finally do find the odd person that wants to sit down. It's like, Dan, I've talked with you for an hour about this, and I need a break. That you're talking too much. This is too heavy. This is too intense. This is too emotional. Why do you think so much? You're not like other men. So I listen to, on the one hand, the complaints about men, but then I hear the opposite complaints, or I'm completely ignored because it's an inconvenient incongruity, and I further feel shamed. and rejected and on the outside. I'm not interested in sports. I'm way more interested in solving some of these issues. And so I just feel like one thing after another happens and I don't fit in. My body gets exhausted from all this manic, panic energy for years and years without the turn-off switch. Chronic fatigue. Irritability. When you're exhausted and your adrenals are spent and you spent a lifetime in panic and fear, irritability goes up. A sense of insanity. Because these emotions and these thoughts are no longer relating to the outer reality. Because using that hyper brain intelligence, I strategically and with discipline catapulted my reality into something resembling an outer dream life of my own business, my own creativity, my own free time. As an engineer, I am brilliant at understanding systems and can use that to create success, but it does not change the underlying trauma, which is frozen in time, and all the feelings that that then triggers, which then creates this new thing of insanity, which is simply the incongruity of the inner and the outer reality. You know, if someone gives you a chocolate cake and you make a sour face as if it's bitter, it doesn't match up. If someone gives you $1 million and you feel terrified, it doesn't match up. If someone gives you a dream reality and you feel depressed, it doesn't match up. And a lot of the depression is it's not working. You know, so there's this depressing lie that, you know, live the American dream and you'll be happy, and you're lucky and you'll be happy and it all works out. But it's not true. Be more successful and the insanity feeling goes up. And certainly there's pleasure and enjoyment and pride, but it's overshadowed by the greater intensity from the past, frozen in memory. Pain goes up as trying all the various techniques of diet and therapy and this and that don't end up sustainably working. Now, the next really big brick in all of this is sensitivity. And this is a big one to understand, and there's a couple of things about it. One, it does not mean sensitive people, or in this case, highly sensitive people in the context of Elaine Aron's book, The Highly Sensitive Person, does not mean that someone behaves in a way that makes the majority of people around them happy. Sensitivity, in a technical sense, works like this. if 80% of the world hears music at 0.5 volume, the highly sensitive person hears it at 2, so maybe a 4 times increase. And what does that mean? It means that for the highly sensitive person, what is pleasant to 80 to 90% of the population is, let's say in music, if the volume of music you listen to was 4 times louder than was comfortable for you, suddenly it starts to give you a headache. It starts to feel painful. You want to put your hands over your ears, but then you can't function because you got your hands full, and it's frustrating. It's like, do I cover my ears or do I, write this? Do I get close to this? And so this creates a whole list of ripple effects. In relationships. I'll just talk a little bit about that today. So, first of all, because I'm exhausted, I'm sleeping about 10 hours and still waking up fried. So that's kind of me. So because of that, so this just little window into sensitivity. So 10 hours of sleep. But feeling fried. Because it makes such a difference allowing myself to wake up naturally, I have to schedule things, and because I cannot control when I fall asleep, I'm making this video because there's a mild drumbeat from a party that's been at just a kind of barely audible level, keeping me up. I can't get to sleep. I've turned on a fan I don't like hearing to try and mask the sound. It's not effective. It's now 2 a.m., which means that rather than waking up at 10 a.m. and going to bed at midnight, I will now wake up at noon. I can't predict when a mild anomaly like this will happen, and I can't get to sleep. I feel helpless because there are forces in play beyond my control that are revving me up and activating the PTSD type symptoms on the very night before I fly back from Manila to San Francisco, which is one of the worst legs one can fly on the planet. So I feel helpless because on the night I need a really good night's sleep, I can't fall asleep. So I know this. So the long and short of it is I can't schedule things before noon. Otherwise, at this moment in time, when it's 2 a.m. and I'm not getting to sleep, I have a new problem, which is worry about either further frying my adrenals by getting up without enough sleep and ruining 1 to 2 days of my life and the way it makes me feel, or missing an appointment and feeling like shit because I'm really high on integrity. And then I can't get sleep, but it's torture. And I feel completely helpless in that. And then that reactivates some of the intensity of the helplessness of the early childhood memories and PTSD. So knowing that, and knowing that I can't know how I'm going to feel day to day, I do a lot of things last minute. So in the last 24 hours, I waited till 24 hours before flying to confirm that I would fly from an island back to Manila. Because I waited late, I paid double the plane ticket. So that's just standard for me, paying double. Because I can't deal with the noise of almost most of the environments if I'm in a city, I have to stay 5-star. Not because I need to, but because that's the way my body can cope. Because I need to stay 5-star, I've got to be on top of my game with my business. But because my body is fried, I can only work 2 to 4 hours a day before I start to feel exhausted. That's how bad it's gotten, and it's been going downhill for 15 years. Because my expenses are going up as my energy is going down over this 15-year period, I have to work like hell to create efficiencies that can see my income rising as my physical output goes down. This has seen me, among other things, listening to 200 books on business in the last 4 years alone. This contributes to desperation because it's not good to have energy on a steady down trail and expenses on a steady up trail. This leads to thoughts of suicide, which in turn leads to more panic and desperation. Why? Because if I'm thinking of suicide, I know that things are really bad. At the same time, I know my life has never been better, is better than I ever thought it would be, and doesn't seem like it can get that much more better on an outer level, like earning capacity, that kind of thing. And yet I'm feeling worse than I've ever felt. And and if I'm thinking suicide in this high reality, it's like, what would I be if my reality crashes? Yet panic and desperation leads to more chronic fatigue. And back on the sensitive spectrum, so I paid double for a last minute and then paid another 30% to take a particular afternoon flight that, because the airline is often late, wouldn't get me in too late, which they were 4 hours late. And was one of the most expensive flights on the flight that day because I had to pick that flight so as not to stress out and then end up stressing out about stressing out, which gets into these loops. because so in this state of panic, I am more bossy and controlling to respond to the sense of helplessness and desperation. Because I'm sensitive and pick up on what's going on around me, I observe how badly this affects most people, and it feels terrible. But I feel like I'm caught between this rock and a hard place. Now, it would be one thing if I hadn't spent $250,000 on energy work, Reiki, acupuncture, therapy, workshops, you name it. If I didn't have a perfectly beautiful, quiet house all to myself, which I have to pay for an entire empty house, because back to the noise and sleep and all that, the amount of income I would lose to not being able to sleep by, quote, sharing expenses. So my housing would go down from $3,000 a month to $1,500 a month. But the loss in income would pay for that many times over. And so everything has to be more expensive and more redundancies. Like, because I'm tired, I've got to prepare. Like I'll keep extra stuff on hand, which means I need to have more savings to buy and stockpile all that extra stuff, so that if I collapse in exhaustion, I can still cope. I have to have a daily house cleaner to buy me an extra hour as one of my efficiencies, as my energy and fatigue keeps taking me down. And so I get stressed out around people not understanding me and asking me to repeat myself, which is standard fare in Philippines. And so I delegate all that to my girlfriend, but then feel nervous that I'm really close to the edge. And if she misses something, I feel like the whole day could be ruined, or much bigger than that, because I'm so exhausted. And so I'm harder on her. And that makes me sad, because I can see it and I know what it does to our love and our relationship. Which brings me back to helplessness. Because $250,000 in therapy, etc., has not resolved these tensions. And in many ways, they've gotten worse, because the helplessness has gotten up, and the rage at the helplessness and the despair. This is more than anyone I know wants to understand. And it's my daily emotional reality. I get to the airport, and not only are they late and then late and then late, so 3 different delays, but the PA system is so loud that even wearing Bose noise quiet protecting headphones, it hurts my ears. I'm angry that on top of dealing with all of this, I have to deal with the insensitivity of a PA announcer who doesn't give a shit that their voice is so loud, it's distorting the speakers. As usual, the combination of not wanting to feel helpless and not wanting to feel pain and knowing that it's up to me to do something because no one else will, leads me to approach two airline desks. I have to describe, while in pain, why the volume should be turned down. I am assured that it will be, which I am cynical enough to know I will probably be lied to, which I am. So I go back 5 minutes later. Then they argue with me, seeing that their lie didn't work, then they argue with me. All the while, I'm in pain. Listening to the distorted, super high volume alarm PA system in a crowded airport I would give anything to avoid. But instead I'm in and out with these delays. Every time I take a taxi away from the airport and get somewhere quiet, it's time to come back only to find there's another delay. As a sensitive body, hypersensitive to allergies, I have allergies to a number of items which make it very hard to get food at fast food joints, such as Philippine airports. I go to a local 5-star resort and have some satisfaction micromanaging a drink, I think, that will help me feel better. Kind of a hybrid virgin pina colada in just the right recipe. And preparing and trying to guess what I'm going to be in for, because I may be in for another wait on the tarmac. This stuff brings up pain, which in turn leads to impatience, which in turn, when disrespected and ignored or lied to, leads to rage and hostility. I find myself in situations like this being extremely rude in my tone and pace, walking away from people as they're asking for the third time, "What did you say?" Cursing under my breath. You know, the sensitive part in me can tell that I'm making a scene. and yet there's no more reserves to care or do anything about it. And I feel so burdened by so many levels of stuff that I didn't cause, that I don't want, and I feel so little control over, that I don't have much grace to hear that someone doesn't like my tone, or could I just be more patient for the third delay? I just don't have the grace. And again, I feel helpless. And when I see so many people who would have an easier life if I didn't exist, it brings back the possible win-win of suicide. Yet when I look at all of this stuff, and it just keeps going. One after another, and this all the way back to the beginning with all these bricks getting laid, one after another. And I realize that I'm in a culture that doesn't teach parents how to protect their children, that does a poor job of at best at intervening and a huge job of denial of what goes on, that doesn't even acknowledge how much of our lives go back to these childhood moments that, plagues people with, my dad read me the Old Testament just so I could be in no doubt about how sick God was, that he'd test people for not cutting their sons in half, if, that they should be right ready with the sword, just for God's word, because if he changed his mind, he'd be willing to chop his child in half. I should be really aware that there's a God that's this sociopathic, and that's all powerful, and that knows everything, including how bad I am. That I'm in this culture where all of this can go on, where I can be given tutors. And that this is, for my hyperactivity and treated like, why is this mysterious thing happening, as opposed to, isn't it blatantly obvious, let's look at family. Somebody needs to be talking about this. If I die, it would be very convenient, for me at least, and yet so much of these bricks being built are built into the culture. So much of this wall that just zigs, it's like there's just no way within an hour to cover the complexity of how these co-infections, these diseases of heart and mind, go back and forth and back and forth. It's like rays from everyone out to all the others, and then raise all the way back. And then it gets built up through time to where there's hardly anything of this beautiful self, this beautiful bubble of possibility and innocence and trust and love that was born and that was there, left to fight for itself rather than just co-infect and cope and respond to all of this disease and try and do something beautiful, something sacred, something meaningful with a life. I think we, as individuals and as a culture, need to have these conversations, need to start interrupting the cycles of violence and trauma that are happening daily in around 1/3 of households, whether it's the messages of shame and apathy and abuse through neglect and sociopathic numbness, or the active abuse of torture and trauma, but also insensitivity. Because when we're in a reality where adults are 5 times bigger, plus completely powerful, it is not safe and it is terrifying for a child when parents fight, when huge older siblings fight, when violence is on TV. It's terrifying. And what I do now, and spend a lot of energy trying to do, is try and see through the maze of all of these thousands and thousands of crosshairs of pain and shame and fear and loneliness, and I try and see what might I see if I wasn't looking through all this baggage. What might I see, and what would be intelligent if I wasn't? And then I try and do that in that moment of sanity. And when I do, my reality improves. But my feelings do not. The feelings that are frozen in the timeless part of the brain that's activated by trauma. It's called Broca's area, where time shuts down. Memories are preserved, fresh, and are relived. And emotions from the past stay alive. What being sensitive means is that all of this feels bigger, more intense, more painful. And my body feels more stress. I want to talk now about hate, because it's an important co-infection and side effect of being left here, deteriorating, in denial, asked by 10 to 20 people a day, how you doing? Hated by all of them if I even begin to answer. And doing my absolute best to just stay neutral, which means that I've got to improve numerous things every year as other things inevitably deteriorate. So I'm fighting this with everything that I can. And the large amounts of money I'm spending fighting it, like I'm not working right now. I'm finishing a 2-month sabbatical, which is a coping sabbatical. And I'm systematically spending money to stay alive, i.e., if it's too painful, I will end my own life. When I get close to that arena, I've got to work hard and do whatever it takes to get out of that arena, or I'm dead. Now, I have no champions in this arena. I guess I have very little space as well. I have no champions in this arena. There's no one who is saying, Dane's, spent $250K to overcome all this childhood stuff, and let's rush in and see what we can do to help him. No, I've got professionals who may be destructive or helpful. It's about a 50-50 odds, whether working with a professional in a therapeutic capacity will increase or downgrade my well-being. But there's a 100% chance that it'll cost time off work plus $100 to $200 an hour. So that's my, quote, allies there. I have a government that will not let my friends visit me who are most healing and therapeutic because they're Filipinos. Just won't let them visit me. So I have my government denying freedom to travel where I can work in the US and make money. Instead, I have to spend $20K a month to take time off work and spend money in 5-star hotels because my government will not let Thais or Filipinos visit me. It's completely sociopathic. The money that I spend treating all of this is not tax deductible, which doesn't make sense. Because if I die, my business dies, along with who I employ. And because I'm taking so much time off work to treat this and travel, the IRS is actually losing money, but there's no sanity there. It's not like I can call someone and say, this is insane. Could we be sane here? No. If I call the IRS for a bit of insanity, I'll be put on hold. I think last time was for 3 hours. So that's the best government our tax dollars can buy at present. So I've got basically sociopathic interface and policy. I'm not a human being with a real issue where people can help in this situation. I'm a citizen in an algorithm of laws that are as often as not crazy. Just like I'm an infant in an algorithm of abuse and trauma and shame being passed on in abusive patterns through intergenerations that have little to do with my well-being. And just as I'm in a culture that can ask me how I'm doing 10 times a day and nobody wants to know, and where most professionals haven't a clue about what to do to make this better, or they'd have better than 50-50 odds. Now, certainly in the $250,000 of therapy that I've spent, I'd say 25% of it has been very helpful. But traditional therapy doesn't deal with trauma. Our government was in denial of PTSD passionately to avoid paying veterans, and so the science is in a relatively weak state. I've tried EMDR, I've worked with constellation therapies, I've read all of the best books. I'm often in a position of educating my therapists and paying them $125 an hour to educate them, because they haven't been bothered to explore and read all the books because they didn't need to, because they weren't in that much pain. I have to decide how I feel about that. It's frankly maddening. This is painful. It's lonely. It's frustrating. It's helpless. It's not helpless, it feels helpless. And I feel overwhelmed and lonely. It's very, very painful. To such an overwhelming degree that I can't always tolerate the level of pain, because it's so chronic and deep, it's unbearable, which leads to another brick in the wall, which is compulsiveness. I am 30% compulsive. Doesn't matter what I do. I can watch porn, I can masturbate, I can get jobs done, I can read, I can write, I can make recordings, I can sleep. I've got to do 30% of my life compulsively to take the edge, because compulsiveness, wherever it expresses itself in an addiction or a drug or whatever, it's creating a frenetic energy to mask and numb emotion because the emotion is too painful. When I am being compulsive, I can't interact optimally with people, because whatever it is, I may be compulsively talking. The primary focus of compulsiveness is to respond to pain, not to create comfort for the other person. The primary focus. The secondary focus, as any addict knows, if they could drink and be nice, they would. If they could get the money for cocaine and pay the school bill, they would. And they often do. The problem comes when there isn't enough money, when there isn't enough attention for both. Numbing the pain comes first. In compulsiveness, numbing the pain comes first. Attunement comes second. As a result, relationships are strained. Or broken. This further adds to loneliness and despair. Because in my reality, relationship only lasts when I can control all of the variables so that my compulsive, impatient rage, pain, and irritation does not come out at unacceptable levels for the vast majority of people. This is a matter of rolling the die. If I do it all right, if I get the right job, if I make sure that people don't visit me right when I come home from work, if I gauge effectively how exhausted I'll be after 2 to 4 hours of labor and chronic fatigue, if I ask all the right questions, if I pick the right people, if the client didn't come home early and change their mind, if all of this goes right, I am in a low enough pain level, low pain, not no pain, there's never no pain, but low pain level, that I have the freedom to choose to be the person I enjoy being. If any of these variables don't work, and I'm off-center and in pain, and therefore in compulsion and pain management, something feels off. Because it is off. I'm medicating. And the relationship is being used as medication in that way. It's just a matter of time before someone really needs me, just what any addict faces, and the person lets them down, in this case me, because they've got to take the edge off their pain before they can show up and be there for the person. And in this process, which I try my damnedest to control is one of my medicines and my sources of exhaustion, my saviors, and my downfall. The relationship crumbles, the trust is destroyed, and I end up all alone and starting over in all of this exhaustion. Now, no one wants to understand all this. They don't want to understand all this. They don't want to see. They don't want my problems to exist. They don't want to partner with me to avoid tragedy or disaster or failure. In many cases, they can't. And everything that I do to try and work around this painful crux right in the center of relationships is thwarted 99% of the time. No time. So I wrote a 400-page user's manual to respond to some of this. It's all there. Nobody wants to read it. People want to judge. Who are you that thinks you're so important you should have a user's manual? More loneliness. People want to project all their own stories about all this rather than actually listen to any of it, causing more pain and loneliness. People are too busy and fractured for me to calm down. It takes about 4 hours for me to calm down. Do you know how much time and how many people I have to call to get 4 hours? Now, if I get it, people want to give it 1 to 2 weeks in advance. But I don't know how I'm going to feel 1 to 2 weeks in advance. And not knowing adds more stress. Because I don't want to let them down and disappoint them. But I have no way of knowing until the day how I'm doing. Maybe 1 to 2 days is the best I can do and feel great about it. So the manager at my hotel, the general manager, invited me to a symphony with his mother because he appreciated various things. I had invited them to something spontaneously. I said, would you like to do this spontaneously? Because I'm working around all this. They said, no, thank you so much, but we want to invite you to something next Friday, a week from now. I said, I think I'll be available. That's all I can say. And they said, great, we'll firm it up Monday and see you then. I said, okay. Do I really want to explain all this for 45 minutes in an elevator conversation? I can't. Are they going to ask? No. Are they going to notice that I said I'm inviting you to spontaneous things? No. It's just a 50-50 odds. I called them the morning of and canceled. And I felt bad. And they felt bad. And I felt bad that they felt bad. And that's my life. No time and space to understand any of this complexity, which leaves me behind a wall. I don't know what stories they made up about me canceling. Maybe I'm free. Maybe I don't care. They're not going to tell me. like so many other people. But whatever story they made up, it's not the truth, and it's now a wall, and I'm on the outside. And it's painful. And this is my life, month after month after month after month, after I work harder than anyone I know to get around the wall. I write books. I hire virtual assistants. I hire assistants. I figure out how to pay for them. I grow my sales. I train my crew. I take more vacations to cope. And I buy anything I can think of that will help. I create large savings cushions so that I can collapse for a month or two at a time. And I design my entire life from not having any number of friends to not taking any appointments before noon to not doing anything more than 1 to 2 days in advance to not taking more than one job at a time. There's almost no area of my life that is not directly designed to accommodate all of this. And the whole origins of it, the timeless terror, shame, dread, and growing exhaustion feels out of control. And a lot of my energy is spent managing the pain of it. And even picking what I do based on whether or not it's loud enough to numb that pain. I might raise my voice just so that my voice is loud enough to talk over all this pain. I might start running even though I'm exhausted because dread is drifting in on the edges. It's too much. I might be more assertive and dominant in an interaction than I want to be because helplessness is creeping in. And a memory is starting to surface. And I don't want to feel helpless in that moment. And my assertiveness masks it, gives me a diversion. And another person gets used to be my diversion. And I know it's usury. And I don't know what else to do in that moment because that's the moment when the dread surfaced and no one's been able to help with that. The amount of people in an entire lifetime who will even sit down and listen to this, I can count on one hand. The amount of people that don't get terrified, numbed, and glazed over is a couple of fingers. And the amount of people that say, Dane, I tracked everything you said. It all made sense, and I know what to do to help you is zero. There's only one person who's really listened to most of this, not all of this, most of this. And what does he say? Dane, you're fucked. I know what you're talking about. I've experienced bits of it myself. This world is not a good place for all this to be going on. And I don't know what to tell you. Working this hard for 41 years, achieving pretty much all of my goals, building my house, developing several businesses, doing all the art, writing 10 books. I've achieved over 1,000 goals. And it's not loud enough anymore to get through all this pain. And yet the pain was unbearable when I was 2 years old, and it feels bigger in many ways today. And I don't know what to do about all that. I know it's not right. It's not right for a child to be treated that way. It's not ideal for a culture to be this avoidant of emotions. It's not right that a single adult did not want to know what was going on when I tried to talk about it. It's not right how so much of this has been denied. It's not right that therapy is not tax deductible. It's not right. So much of it, there's hardly any of it that's right. And that's not encouraging, because it's, again, that's not in my sphere of influence. I feel so tired and so much pain and so lonely in all of this, and there's no one to share the load. I don't want to share this pain with people, which creates this really mixed feeling around being here. I don't want to give this to someone. I don't want to give them my impatience. I don't want to give them the pain. I don't want to give them the depression. I don't even want to break the delusion. A lot of people have this wonderful delusion that if they make enough money, if they achieve their goals, if they do their passion, if they do meditation. I've done 2,500 hours of meditation. If they worked on their inner child, I've done 300 hours of that. If they do this stuff, they will be happy. I'm not good news to these people who haven't gotten around to doing all that, but believe that if they will and do, they will be happy. Not necessarily, certainly not if there's PTSD and trauma. And so that's depressing. I'm not pleasant news for all the simple thinkers. And I don't like being bad news. I don't like being depressing. I don't like being bad news. I don't like being inconvenient. I don't like it. And I feel helpless to stop it. So this is my wall. And I feel like I have little cracks here and there that I can see through. But that it's a pretty big wall. I can crawl through here. I can see bits and pieces through here, through some of the wire meshing. And in my imagination, it is heavenly. I feel like I'm running against the clock. And racing to fill things with enough loud, positive stuff that I don't just completely give up. And that racing is, of course, not understood. It's not understood. It's all kinds of things are projected on it other than this. And I don't even have the time and energy anymore to correct all the projections. It's just kind of giving up and letting it be fine that I'm not seen and I'm not seen that I'm not seen, because so many people over my lifetime will and do project a story and run with it and not even allow that their story could have been just a story and check it out. Like, this is my story about you. Why are you actually doing this? No, it's like, this is my story about you. That is the reality. I'm not going to check it with you, and I'm going to act as if. And so, this is the, what I'm running with at the moment is shame and trauma videos in the hope that they can help others and be an outlet for some of this stuff, since there's almost no person who's an outlet, one. Two, a whole host of ideas that are part of my frenetic mental activity that I've been saving up and that just kind of come to me every day. And so I've started ideas worth acting on. There's a whole host of changes in companies and things that I've wanted to see, and I've written and advocated for all of those. And I'm mentoring this amazing young woman who's got PTSD and trauma and is blossoming. And that's my biggest focus, is making sure her life blossoms despite all the abuse that she's gone through in her abusive culture. I'm just sick of it. It's so disgusting, and like just one thing after another from her parents, relatives, neighbors, school, and the Catholic Church and the culture at large. Just one thing after another, and I'm just grateful that she's letting me help her, because it gives me some hope that if I'm taking a stand for someone in that situation, there are people taking a stand for people in that situation, which is more hopeful than what I experienced, which was a lot of people don't take a stand for someone in desperate situations. And that's a miserable life. When someone's in that amount of pain and is betrayed and sold out for convenience, it's not worth living. And what I've wanted to do in this video around this wall is paint a picture that people with mental emotional dis-ease and sickness, it's not crazy. It's not to be unexpected. It's rational, it's logical, it's pervasive. 1 in 4 American adults is going to experience mental emotional disease this year. And it's growing because these kinds of conversations are not talked about, and there isn't the time made that is necessary in a shallow and modern world to cover the depth and complexity of what's actually going on and to respond. And when we can see the threads from childhood to the present that are actively and persistently thwarting the people we want to be and the realities we want to create, we have a choice to change some of that reality. I hope that if you followed even 50% of this, that you are cognizant that you or people you know are going through some of this, sometimes worse, sometimes less, but some of this. And that it's systemic, it's not random, has nothing to do with the way we were born or our potential, has everything to do with the culture and the way that we treat one another. That technology cannot fix most of it and will not fix most of it. Human kindness and the choice to put human emotions before gadgets, before money, before power, and to face our own demons rather than pass them on. That's really the only thing that's going to address most of this. Some of it I can address by buying a whole house to myself and doing this and taking time off work and all this stuff. But that doesn't heal it. That simply works around the symptoms, managing pain that grows over time. And if you understand half of this and know that it's relatively common, I hope you will join me in realizing that it's really important to be kind, to make time to really listen, to make time to really speak, and to find those few individuals at present, very few, who are willing to do that. And I also want to share the area that I have the biggest hope, which is not from human beings. It's in meditation, because there is consciousness that is big enough to hold this amount of pain and more. Very hard to put into words, and it's very hard not to project parts of the culture onto it. But that's really the only reason I'm here. And I think it's important to rely to some extent on that until we as people learn to be that for one another. Thank you for listening.